She married into millions, a big house, twin daughters, a quiet life with a retired media executive. But just 4 years later, he was clinging to life in a hospital bed. Celeste Johnson was born in 1963 in Culver City, California. She met her birth mother only once. She was told her mother saw her as just an incubator. She was adopted and raised by Edwin Johnson. Celeste later said her childhood was harsh. She even tried to take her own life as a teenager. When she was 17, she became pregnant with twins, Jennifer and Christina. Their father was her first husband, Craig Bratcher. That marriage ended when Bratcher took his own life in 1996. Celeste went on to marry 2 more times. In 1993, she moved to Austin, Texas. In Austin, she worked as a waitress at the exclusive country club. There, she met Stephen Beard, a 70-year-old retired executive from Fox Broadcasting. His wife had passed away in 1993. He and Celeste married on February 18, 1995. Shortly before the twins turned 18, Stephen legally adopted them. Over time, money became a source of tension. Celeste's spending grew. Her husband's accountant testified that in just October and November 1999, she burned through $321,000, and by early December, another $249,000, with roughly $100,000 more spent in the 6 weeks before March 2000. Stephen once filed for divorce in 1996, but he later withdrew his petition. In early 1999, Celeste checked into St. David's Pavilion in Austin for treatment of depression. There, she met Tracy Tarleton, who managed a bookstore and was also in treatment. Celeste formed an intimate bond with Tracy Tarleton. Witnesses even saw them share a bed. Hospital records show a staff member intervened after seeing Tarleton massaging Celeste. Tarleton later said their relationship was romantic. On October 2, 1999, at about 3 a.m., Tarleton snuck into the Beard home. She carried a 20-gauge shotgun. Stephen was asleep. Tarleton fired once, hitting him in the abdomen. He was rushed to the hospital. He survived but was badly wounded. Celeste, who had been sleeping elsewhere because of Stephen's breathing machine, went to see him in intensive care. Stephen left the hospital in January 2000. After returning home, Stephen developed a severe infection. Celeste called his doctor demanding a readmission. He was hospitalized again and passed away a couple days later from septic shock. Prosecutors said Celeste stood to gain his money and that she wanted to be with Tarleton. Tarleton admitted her role. She said Celeste described Stephen as controlling and claimed that getting him out of the way was the only way out. According to Tarleton, Celeste helped plan the break-in. She suggested shooting Stephen in the stomach to avoid a mess. She promised to pick up the spent shell and even talked about making sure he got an infection after surgery. Celeste's defense team said Tarleton was obsessed and unreliable. Celeste denied everything. She said she had no romantic involvement with Tarleton. She blamed her twins for giving angry testimony. They would inherit nothing until she passed. On March the 28th, 2002, Celeste was arrested. She was charged under Texas's law of parties, which can hold someone responsible for a fatal act carried out by another person if they helped or encouraged it. At trial, prosecutors pointed to Celeste's debts, her huge spending, the rocky marriage, and Tarleton's statements. They also brought up alleged attempts to poison Stephen and a secret romantic affair Celeste had with a former husband. The twins testified they saw their mother kissing Tarleton. The defense said those moments were staged. In April 2003, Celeste Beard Johnson was found guilty of 2 counts, ending the life of an elderly person and a related serious offense. She received 2 back-to-back life sentences and a $10,000 fine. She can ask for parole on April 1, 2042, when she turns 79. Tarleton took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 20 years and was released in 2011. The next woman had it all: respect, power, and a picture-perfect family. So how did everything fall apart? Lorie Eisenberg was born in 1953 as Lorsine Barnes in Idaho. Her life began quietly. Raised in a modest home, married young to Stephen Barnes, and together they had 6 daughters. But after their divorce in 1996, things began to shift. Lorie moved to Coeur d'Alene and started working as a secretary for Lorie Eisenberg, a well-liked local figure. They married in 2004, blending their families into a sprawling household of 8 children, grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild. Lorie rose quickly in her new life. She became executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, a nonprofit trusted with public funds to help struggling families find affordable housing. She wasn't just a community figure. She was in charge. She managed large budgets. She earned public respect. Between 2015 and early 2018, Lorie began siphoning money from the organization. She created fake invoices,
fake companies, some named after her own daughters. She redirected over $500,000 into her personal account, and she didn't keep it all to herself. 4 of her daughters later admitted they took part in the scheme too. On February 13, 2018, Lorie and Larry went out on Lake Coeur d'Alene to watch the sunrise. Lorie later said that Larry had a stroke near the boat's motor. She said he fell into the water. She said she tried to pull him back in. Then she returned to shore to get help. She said she left her phone behind. She said she waited 2 hours, then called for help. At first, officials treated the event as a tragic accident. A few days later, on February 27th, Lorie was arrested. She faced 40 counts of forgery and 1 count of grand theft. These charges came after an audit of the nonprofit. Then, on March 1st, Larry's body was found. The coroner reported that he had passed away from a very high amount of a common allergy medicine ingredient. It was not a drowning. Investigators found searches on Lorie's devices about water safety, boat accidents, and depth of water in Florida. They thought she might have planned an earlier incident. They also found changes Lorie made by hand to Larry's will. She had set aside 80% of his estate for her daughters. Only 20% would go to Larry's own 2 children. Officials believe Lorie added the medicine to a drink she planned to take herself, but Larry drank from the same bottle and lost his life. Prosecutors say Lorie wanted to stop Larry from discovering her large theft. She faced exposure, a ruined reputation, and prison time if he learned the truth. In November 2018, Lorie admitted she had committed wire fraud and theft from a federal program. She said she had taken about $580,000. A judge sent her to prison for 5 years. She also faced a $20,000 fine and had to pay back nearly $580,000. She would serve 3 more years on supervised release after prison. 4 of her daughters agreed to probation and to pay back money. While she served that sentence, Lorie faced new charges in February 2020. She was accused of causing the serious harm that led to Larry's passing. In February 2021, she entered an offered plea to a reduced charge. This plea means she did not admit guilt, but acknowledged there was enough evidence to find her responsible. On May 24, 2021, a judge gave her a life term with at least 30 years fixed. The judge also counted the time she had already served. At sentencing, Lorie spoke for nearly an hour. She said she felt deep regret. She said she was to blame for what happened to Larry, though she claimed she did not mean to harm him. She said she had mixed the medicine into her own drink, thinking about ending her own life. She said she was shocked and confused when Larry drank from that bottle. She said she thought about jumping into the lake to join him, but she stopped herself because she did not want to leave her family without support. She closed with, "I am responsible for Larry's passing, absolutely. I'm so sorry for everything I did, starting with the theft, the lies, the betrayal of love and trust, especially with Larry." Court officials found her explanation did not match the evidence. They pointed to her online searches and will changes as proof of planning. Lorie is now held at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She will first serve her federal sentence, then the state term. She can ask for parole in 2050, when she will be in her mid-90s. Her actions broke her family into 2 sides. 4 of her daughters spoke against her. One, Amber Barnes, said, "We do not support her. We do not stand by her." They said they remain loyal to Larry's memory. Larry's own children said his loss left a deep emptiness. They felt justice was still missing. The big question is this: was Larry's passing an accident or the result of a planned act? Lorie said it was an accident born of her despair, but investigators saw months of planning, including the theft, will changes, and research into water conditions. The court agreed with that view. Today, Lorie Eisenberg remains in custody, serving a sentence that may last the rest of her life. The next woman married into a hotel empire, but luxury wasn't enough. Narcissus Novak was born Narcissa Velis Pacheco in 1956. She came into the public eye when she married Ben Novak Jr. He inherited the Fontainebleau, Miami Beach hotel fortune. That hotel, built by his father in 1954, was a symbol of luxury. Although Novak Sr. lost it in the late 1970s, Ben Jr. later built his own successful business. He organized major conventions, including events for Amway. Narcissus had a varied past. She once worked as an exotic dancer in Hialeah, Florida. She used the stage name Sylvia. When she married Ben, she gained access to his private wealth. This included multi-million-dollar homes, fine jewelry, luxury cars, and a collection of Batman items worth about $2 million. On April 4, 2009, Bernice Novak, Ben's 87-year-old mother, was found in her garage in Fort Lauderdale. Investigators first called it an accidental fall, but her jaw was broken and there were red smears. Those signs pointed to foul play. Then, on July 12, 2009, Ben Jr., 53, was found in a penthouse suite at the Hilton in Rye Brook, New York. He was bound with duct tape. He had been beaten with dumbbells. He was suffocated. His eyes were removed with a sharp tool. Investigators later connected both incidents to Alejandro Garcia and Joel Gonzalez. They had been recruited by Narci's brother, Cristobal Veliz, under her direction. Why would she do this? Prosecutors said she feared divorce. A prenuptial agreement would have left her with only $65,000 if they split. They argued her motives were money, hatred, and revenge. They also noted she took more than $100,000 from his convention earnings after he passed. Narci's defense tried to shift the blame to her daughter, May Abad. They claimed May had orchestrated everything to get the Batman collection. The jury did not agree. The federal trial began in June 2012 in White Plains, New York. Narci faced many charges. These included homicide, conspiracy, racketeering, domestic violence, stalking, money laundering, witness tampering, and interstate transportation of stolen property. After the jury's decision, both Narci and Cristobal were found guilty on all major counts. They did not appear when the verdict and sentence were announced. On December 17, 2012, Judge Kenneth Karras sentenced Narci to life in prison with no chance of release. She also forfeited about $7 million in assets, paid $250,000 in fines, and had to repay stolen funds. Karras said, "Because of Ms. Novak's greed and selfishness, 2 innocent people are gone." U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara added, "They have red on their hands and will spend the rest of their lives answering for what they did for money." Narci is still serving her sentence at FCI Tallahassee in Florida. Cristobal Veliz is serving life at USP Big Sandy in Kentucky. Up next is a mother-daughter trip, a luxury hotel, and a secret plan that ended in horror. Heather Lois Mack was born in 1995 in Illinois. She grew up in a well-off family in Chicago. Her father, James L. Mack, was a jazz musician and composer who passed away in 2006. Her mother, Sheila von Wiesmack, was a socialite and supporter of many charities. Sheila also spent more than 10 years studying political science. When James passed away, Sheila set up a trust fund of about $1.50, $1.6 million for Heather. That money was meant to be released when Heather turned 30. Heather and her mother did not get along well. There were multiple visits by officers to their home in Oak Park. Those calls involved everything from stolen items to incidents of harm. In one case, Sheila said Heather had broken her arm. No one saw how badly things would get. In August 2014, 18-year-old Heather was pregnant. She and Sheila went to the St. Regis Hotel in Vallarta. Heather secretly used her mother's credit card to book a business-class flight for her boyfriend, Tommy Schaefer. Investigators later said that Heather and Tommy planned to cause Sheila's passing so Heather could claim her inheritance. On August 7th, cameras in the hotel lobby caught a heated argument between Sheila and Tommy. That night, while Heather held Sheila's mouth to keep her quiet, Tommy struck Sheila in the head with the metal handle of a fruit bowl. The evidence pointed to a deliberate and forceful act, clear to anyone who reviewed the scene. After Sheila lost her life, Heather and Tommy put her body into a suitcase. They loaded it into a taxi's trunk. The driver ran when he saw a red fluid seeping from the bag. The suitcase was left behind. The next day, officers found Heather and Tommy in a motel and took them into custody. In January 2015, a Bali court charged them with planning the fatal harm of another person, an act that carries capital punishment there. Tommy said Sheila became aggressive after learning about Heather's pregnancy, but video, witness accounts, and other proof showed they had plotted the act. In April 2015, Heather was found guilty as an accomplice. The court showed her some mercy because she was expecting a child. She received a 10-year term. Tommy was given 18 years. Heather spent about 7 years in Caro prison. There, in March 2015, she gave birth to her daughter, Stella. In November 2021, after good conduct and a remission granted by Indonesia's president, Heather was released. She was sent back to Chicago with little Stella. At O'Hare Airport, she was arrested again under sealed U.S. charges from 2017. Those charges alleged she had conspired to cause fatal harm to a U.S. citizen abroad and interfered with the process. U.S. authorities said they could pursue the case because Heather had planned and participated in the fatal act against an American. In June 2023, Heather pleaded guilty to conspiracy to cause fatal harm to a U.S. national. Under her agreement, she faced as many as 28 years in a U.S. prison. Prosecutors pointed out the pre-planning, the violence, and the fact that Heather showed almost no regret until her sentencing hearing. On January 17, 2024, U.S. District Judge Matthew Kennelly gave her a 26-year term. Heather wept in court. Then she turned to her aunts and uncles and said, "It breaks my heart hearing you cry. There's no excuse for trying to harm her. I miss and love my mother. Federal rules mean she must serve at least 85% of that sentence. But officials will credit her for about 2 years served in Indonesia and time spent behind bars in the US. That cuts her actual time to roughly 20 years. Judge Kennelly also ordered Heather to pay $262,708 in restitution. She must pay a $50,000 fine and then spend 5 years under supervision after her release. Her uncle, Bill Wees, spoke for the family of the victim. He told reporters that justice had finally been served and that Heather had only shown true regret at her U.S. sentencing. Next, see how another woman tapped into her husband's assets by luring in a stranger through fake chats. But before we move on to the next case, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Sheree Paulette Kitley Miller was born in 1971 in Flint, Michigan. By the late 1990s, she was married and had 3 young children. She was also helping to raise 2 of her grandchildren. She did not come from great inherited wealth. Still, she had access to the assets her husband Bruce controlled. She met Bruce while working at his scrapyard in Flint. They married in Las Vegas on April 23, 1999, just 4 months after they first met. Bruce Miller owned a salvage yard in Mount Morris, Michigan. Not long after marrying him, Sheree started spending a lot of time in AOL chat rooms. There, she met Jerry Cassidy. He was once a homicide detective in Reno and later worked at a casino. Their online flirting turned serious. Sheree began pretending she was pregnant. She also faked bruises to make it look like Bruce was mistreating her. At one point, she even claimed to be carrying twins. She sent Jerry photos of the fake bruises and a staged positive pregnancy test. Why would she do this? She wanted to pull Jerry in deeper. She needed him to feel he had to protect and support her. He became convinced she was in danger and that he needed to act. On November 8, 1999, Jerry drove almost 800 miles from Reno to Michigan. He went to Bruce's scrapyard office. There, he used a 20-gauge shotgun to fatally shoot Bruce in the neck and upper back. Bruce was working alone at the time. Afterward, Jerry called Sheree's home phone. He let it ring once and then hung up. That single ring was their signal that the plan had succeeded. At first, investigators looked at John Hutchinson, a scrapyard employee who owed Bruce money. He had argued with Bruce and seemed suspicious. But the focus changed when Jerry took his own life on February 11, 2000, in Odessa, Missouri. Under his bed, his brother found a briefcase. Inside were a farewell note, emails, chat logs, and flight records. All of these linked Jerry and Sheree to Bruce's slaying. In his note, Jerry admitted he realized Sheree had lied about being hurt and pregnant. He said she had pushed him into ending Bruce's life. When the case went to trial, Sheree said someone else had made those letters and logs. Her expert witness could not explain how they were forged under cross-examination. That defense fell apart. The trial began on December 12, 2000. Prosecutors said Sheree had planned Bruce's end so she could have his money. They argued that a divorce settlement alone would not have given her enough. They showed how she had lied to Jerry, manipulated him with false documents, and sent fake photos. The jury saw the staged photos and chat logs. They decided she was behind every detail. After 2 days of discussion, they found her guilty of second-degree homicide and conspiracy and first-degree slaying. On January 29, 2001, Judge Judith Fullerton sentenced Sheree to life in prison for conspiracy. She also got 54 to 81 years for second-degree homicide. The 2 terms would run at the same time. She went first to the Robert Scott Correctional Facility. Later, she was moved to the Women's Huron Valley facility near Ypsilanti. In 2007, Sheree was diagnosed with PTSD and other mental health issues. In 2008, a federal court said the note should not have been used at her trial. She was granted a new trial and released on bond in July 2009. But after appeals, higher courts in 2012 and 2014 put her conviction back in place. She returned to prison. In 2016, Sheree sent a letter admitting she played a role in what happened. She wrote, "It's forever and I can't take it back. I don't feel that I deserve to live life and be happy when Bruce and Jerry don't get that chance." Today, at 53, Sheree remains in a Michigan women's prison. She has given interviews in which she expresses regret. She once described how she felt in control of men online, saying it was like a video game. She now says she seeks peace after telling the truth in her confession letter. The next victim built a legal empire, but even he couldn't protect himself from his ex-wife. Betty Broderick was born Elizabeth Ann Biseglia in 1947 in Brooklyn, New York. She was the third of 6 children in a well-off Italian-Irish family in Bronxville, New York. Her father owned a successful plastering business. Her mother taught her Catholic values. She grew up with privilege. She went to Maria Regina High School and Eastchester High School. Then she earned a degree in early childhood education and minored in English at the College of Mount St. Vincent. In 1965, Betty met Dan Broderick at Notre Dame. He was 21 and studying pre-med. She was 17. He asked her out many times until she said yes. They married on April 12, 1969. Not long after, Betty became pregnant with their first of 4 children. For years, she held the family together. She raised the kids and worked part-time. Meanwhile, Dan finished medical and law degrees. He built a successful malpractice law firm in La Jolla, California. To outsiders, they looked like the ideal upper-middle-class couple in San Diego society. By the early 1980s, trouble began. In 1982, Dan hired a 21-year-old legal assistant named Linda Kilkenna. Betty grew suspicious that they were having an affair. In 1985, Dan moved out and took custody of their children. He sold their home and stopped some of the support payments. Betty reacted with anger. She drove her SUV into his front door while the children were inside. She burned his clothes in her yard. She spray-painted rude words on his walls. She left hundreds of threatening messages on his phone. Dan married Linda on April 22, 1989. Linda urged him to wear a protective vest at the wedding. He declined. He may have underestimated how upset Betty had become. Her behavior grew worse. She ignored restraining orders. She kept harassing the couple. Just before the fatal shooting, Betty bought a .38 caliber revolver. In the early morning of November 5, 1989, 2 days before her 42nd birthday, she used her daughter's key to enter Dan and Linda's home in Marston Hills. She stood over their bed in darkness and opened fire. Both were hit. Linda passed instantly. Dan was struck in the chest and lung. As he fell, he said, "Okay, you shot me. I'm dead." Fearful he might call for help, Betty tore the phone off the wall and fled. Later that morning, she surrendered and admitted what she'd done. Betty's lawyers said she acted after years of mistreatment and control by Dan. They argued she reached her breaking point. Psychiatrists for the prosecution diagnosed her with personality disorders. They pointed to her erratic behavior during the divorce, scribbling over court papers, fits of rage, threats, to show she wasn't just a victim. Her first trial in 1990 ended with no agreement. 2 jurors thought the shooting was manslaughter, not intentional homicide. They saw evidence of her mental collapse. She was retried on December 11, 1991. The second jury convicted her on 2 counts of second-degree homicide. In February 1992, the judge gave her 2 back-to-back terms of 15 years to life. She got 2 extra years for illegal use of a firearm. That added up to a 32-year to life sentence. She has been held at the California Institution for Women ever since. Her first bid for release in 2010 was denied because she showed no remorse. She was turned down again in 2011 and 2017. She is next eligible for parole in January 2032 when she will be 84. In prison, she still insists, "This was a case of domestic mistreatment. Now I am only a political prisoner." Up next are 4 sons, a mansion, and a respected doctor husband. And the night everything fell apart. So Susan Cora Caro lived in a comfortable suburb of Camarillo, California. She managed her husband's medical office. Dr. Xavier Caro was a rheumatologist in Northridge. They shared a multi-million-dollar home in the Santa Rosa Valley. Friends knew her as Cora. She had been married to Xavier since 1986. They had 4 sons together. Their life looked stable and happy. Their income came mainly from his medical practice. Cora also handled most of the family money. She even sent about $105,000 to her parents between 1998 and 1999. That led to tension when the office ran into money troubles. Cora was born around 1955. She met Xavier during an externship. For more than 10 years, she worked as his office manager. In mid-1999, things began to fall apart. Xavier accused her of mishandling funds. He found out about the payments to her parents. He then started an affair with a coworker. He even met with a divorce lawyer. Their household grew tense and unhappy. On November 22, 1999, Xavier came home around 6 p.m. He had just finished dinner and margaritas. They argued about their eldest son, Joey. Xavier tried to take Joey's television and game console. Then he left for work. Cora's mother also left, upset by the fight. That night, prosecutors said Cora felt trapped. They argued she wanted to hurt her husband. They said she chose the children he loved most. Around 11:20 p.m., Xavier returned. He found Joey, 11, Michael, 8, and Christopher, 5, fatally wounded in their bedrooms. Gabriel, 1, was still alive. Cora was lying with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to her head. A revolver lay nearby. The prosecution said this was planned. They pointed to months of money disputes, firing, and divorce talks. The defense said Caro was in a fragile mental state. They noted her history of depression, heavy drinking, and past brain surgery. Tests showed different kinds of substances in her system. Experts said she might not have known what she was doing. Caro claimed she could not recall that night. But DNA evidence told another story. Joey and Christopher's DNA was on her clothing and fingernails. That showed she was close to them when they were hurt. Caro faced charges for 3 counts of first-degree homicide and a weapon enhancement. She pleaded not guilty and later pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. In opening statements, the prosecutor told jurors that Caro acted on purpose to take revenge on her husband. The courtroom saw graphic images and a reconstruction of the scene. The defense argued Caro was manipulated and then blamed. They even suggested Xavier might have returned home earlier than he said. Xavier testified in painful detail about the 911 call. DNA and DNA evidence sealed the case for the prosecution. The jury found Caro guilty. In December 2001, she was sentenced to face the maximum punishment. The California Supreme Court reviewed the case in June 2019. It upheld the sentence. The judges noted her long history of mental illness. They agreed she still understood right from wrong. In April 2002, she received the formal sentence. Capital punishment for each count, plus long prison terms for the weapon enhancement. As of July 2025, she remains on San Quentin's Special Housing Unit, age 69. The next woman married at least 11 times and left a trail of bodies and lawsuits behind. Jill Coit was born Jill Lanita Billiot in Lafitte, Louisiana. She later lived in New Orleans and Indiana. Bright and popular in school, she stood out early, not just for her charm, but for her ability to get what she wanted. In 1961, at just 17, she left high school and married her first husband. It was the beginning of a pattern. Over the years, she married at least 11 times to 9 different men. But this wasn't about romance. Jill built her fortune through those marriages using manipulation, deception, and carefully planned scams. After marrying her third husband, Texas engineer William Clark Coit Jr., she inherited part of his estate when he was shot in 1972. The timing was chilling, just weeks before their divorce was set to be finalized. Though people suspected her involvement, no charges were ever filed. She checked into a mental facility soon after, keeping investigators at a distance. She didn't stop there. Jill moved to California and convinced an elderly man to adopt her. When he passed, she inherited much of his wealth too, without ever lifting a finger. Her schemes didn't slow down. She pretended to be pregnant to claim financial support from a Marine Corps major. She repeatedly sued ex-husbands to strip them of their savings. She concealed mortgage fraud to keep her assets hidden. Even while entangled in legal battles, Jill weaponized the court system, using lawsuits and financial sleight of hand to her advantage. In March 1972, William Coit Jr. was shot twice in the back in Houston, Texas. It was cold, calculated. Jill stood to gain, just as she always did. And yet no evidence ever tied her directly to the trigger. In 1991, Jill married Jerry Boggs, a 52-year-old hardware store owner from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. 7 months later, he ended the marriage. He discovered she was still legally wed to another man and had faked a pregnancy. A dispute over a bed and breakfast and money was set for court. Then, on October 22, 1993, Boggs was found unresponsive at home. He had been stunned, struck with a shovel, and shot 3 times with a small pistol. Investigators found wigs, a stun device, and a map to Mexico in Jill's car. This suggested she planned to flee. That same night, Jill called her son and said, "Hey baby, it's over," and it was messy. Her son later testified that she asked him to help cover up what happened. On December 23, 1993, Jill and her boyfriend Michael Backus were arrested. Their 1995 trial took place in Hot Sulphur Springs, Colorado. After the venue was moved, prosecutors said Jill plotted Boggs' end. They claimed she first tried to recruit others, then acted with Backus when nobody else agreed. Her son's testimony and matching marks from the stun device sealed the case. On March 18, 1995, a jury found both Jill Coit and Michael Backus guilty of first-degree charges. On May 24, 1995, Jill received a life sentence plus 47 extra years. Backus also received life in prison. Jill's appeals failed, including one in 1997 and Backus's federal appeal in 2009. Jill is now held at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility in Colorado. Her record number is 86530. She is not eligible for early release. She was also fined $1 million. Up next is a luxury life, a failed divorce, and 67 reasons police knew it wasn't an accident. Rita Shapiro was born in Soviet Ukraine in 1948. Her early years were filled with hardship. When she was 10, someone violated her. Her mother left her at age 11. She struggled to survive on her own. Despite this, she earned a degree in chemistry. In 1969, she married Yakov Glusman. Their son Ilan arrived 2 years later. Rita began a public effort to free Yakov from Soviet rule. She went on an 18-day hunger strike. She met people like George H.W. Bush. In late 1971, Soviet authorities agreed to let Yakov leave. The family first reunited in Vienna. They then moved to Israel. By 1977, they settled in the United States. Yakov became a respected cancer researcher. He worked at Cold Spring Harbor and later at RDER Labs. His salary and smart investments brought them wealth. Rita enjoyed a lavish life. She drove luxury cars. She wore fine fur coats and jewelry. She had cosmetic treatments. Many expenses came from ECI Technologies. Yakov had bought that electronics firm for her. He expected her to run it well. In 1995, their marriage broke down. Yakov fell for a younger colleague, Raisa Korenblit. He moved out and filed for divorce. He offered Rita a generous settlement. She saw her home and status slipping away. She tapped his phone. She hired a private investigator overseas. She threatened to expose photos of him with Raisa. She demanded $100,000 to stay quiet. When talks failed, things grew darker. In February 1996, she approached her cousin, Vladimir Zelinin. He worked for her at ECI. She asked him to end Yakov's life. He at first refused, but she pressured him. On April 6, 1996, they broke into Yakov's apartment in Pearl River, New York. He arrived home around 11:30 p.m. Vladimir struck him first with an axe. Rita joined in, using a hatchet. She finished him with a sharp blade to his torso. They then cut his body into 67 pieces. They removed ears, nose, and lips so no one could recognize him. On Easter morning, April 7th, 1996, a police officer found Vladimir by the Passaic River in East Rutherford, New Jersey. He was dumping bags filled with body parts. In his car sat an axe, a hacksaw, a scalpel, and other tools for dismemberment. His wounded, trembling hand in his confession led officers to the full horror of what had happened. Investigators learned that Rita had bought bandages for Vladimir's hand. Neighbors saw trash bags loaded into both their cars at 3 a.m. Rita fled the scene. 6 days later, police found her hiding in a guest cottage at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. She had a stolen license plate, a passport, and travel guides for Switzerland and Australia. With no direct physical proof tying Rita to the violent act, prosecutors used a federal law under the Violence Against Women Act. It applied because she crossed state lines and caused grievous harm leading to a person's passing. She became the first woman convicted under that statute. Her trial opened in January 1997. Vladimir's testimony described the swift, brutal blows to Yakov's head and torso. Rita's lawyers argued she had planned it, but did not deliver the fatal wounds herself. After just 10 hours of deliberation, jurors found her guilty on every charge. At sentencing in April 1997, her son Ilan begged the court for mercy. Yakov's parents spoke of a long, emotional siege that ended in this brutal dismemberment. Rita spoke from the dock, insisting she did not take Yakov's life. The judge handed her a life sentence. The next scene is one of the most chilling the police had ever seen. Kristen Ross was born in Memphis, Tennessee. She grew up as the oldest child of Ralph and Constance Rossum. Her father taught at a college. Her mother worked at a university. When her father became a college president, the family moved first to California and then to Virginia. She grew up with plenty of resources and supportive, but demanding parents. That background helped shape her drive to succeed. After finishing high school, she went back to California. She did very well in her studies. In 1998, she graduated with honors from San Diego State University. Soon after, she landed a prestigious job as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office. That position came with authority and access to controlled substances. Behind the scenes, she struggled with substance use. She had used illegal substances in high school and college. She kept this private until it reappeared around 2000. Around that time, she also started an affair with her boss, Dr. Michael Robertson. This added more stress to her life. In early autumn 2000, her husband, Gregory DeVillers, discovered both her substance use and the affair. He threatened to tell her supervisors. If he did, her career and public image would have been at risk. On the evening of November 6, 2000, around 9:22 p.m., Rossum called 911. She told them her husband had suddenly stopped breathing. Paramedics arrived and found Gregory lying on the bedroom floor. Red rose petals were scattered around him, echoing a famous movie scene. An external exam showed Gregory had taken a fatal mix of controlled substances, around 7 times more than what the body could tolerate. Investigators later found that several restricted medications were missing from the lab where Rossum worked. Prosecutors said Rossum used her work access to lace her husband's drink with fentanyl. They argued she did this after clonazepam did not have the desired effect. They pointed out her motive. If Gregory spoke out, she would lose her job, her status, and her affair. Investigators also highlighted the rose petals. Rossum had bought a red rose that same day, even though she later claimed it was yellow. The defense offered a different story. They said Gregory was depressed and took his own life by overdosing on multiple medications. They agreed fentanyl caused his passing, but said he injected himself. They described the rose petals as a tragic coincidence. Rossum was charged with first-degree homicide by poisoning. Her trial began in early 2002. The prosecution laid out a timeline. She relapsed, Gregory found out about the affair and substance use, he threatened her, and she chose to poison him. They presented evidence such as her rose receipt at 12:42 p.m., credit card records. Friends and family said Gregory avoided harmful substances and had never expressed a desire to harm himself. The defense insisted she left the house for errands around 6:30 p.m., returned, took a bath, then found Gregory unresponsive and called 911. They argued the fentanyl levels could point to self-administration, but medical experts noted the amount was too high for one person to inject alone, and his body showed he had been unconscious for hours, longer than a typical overdose would allow without intervention. On November 12, 2002, the jury found her guilty of first-degree homicide under California law, with the special circumstance of poisoning. A month later, the court sentenced her to life in prison without any chance of release and fined her $10,000. She was sent to Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In court, her last recorded words were, "I maintain that I did not take Greg's life." There is no record of any request for a final meal. In 2006, Gregory's family filed a civil lawsuit holding Rossum responsible for what happened. They were initially awarded over $100 million in punitive damages and $4.5 million in compensation. Later, the total was reduced to $10 million. In 2010, a Ninth Circuit panel granted her a hearing on claims of ineffective legal help. Her lawyers had not tested for fentanyl breakdown products that might have shown lab contamination. The court noted the very high fentanyl level conflicted with usual overdose patterns and that samples had been stored in a shared refrigerator, risking mix-ups. Despite her appeals, later rulings denied her claims. The Supreme Court refused to review the case in 2011. Her conviction has stood. Today, Kristen Rossum is 48 years old and serving a life sentence without parole. Fllorelis was born in one of Rio de Janeiro's poorest neighborhoods. At 14, she lost both her father and brother in a car crash, a trauma that shaped her early life. She trained as a teacher and later became a Pentecostal pastor. Over time, she opened her home to dozens of children. She claimed to have raised 55 in total, 3 biological, and 51 adopted. Her work with abandoned street children drew national attention and even inspired a 2009 film based on her life. A year later, she signed a gospel music contract. From the 1990s through 2018, she built her own religious empire. She opened church branches, led massive prayer events, and released gospel albums. Her charisma and public image only grew. In 2018, she entered politics, running on a platform of faith, family, and community. She didn't just win, she became the top female vote-getter in Rio de Janeiro, securing a seat in Brazil's Chamber of Deputies. But her story had a far more complicated chapter behind the scenes. In 1991, when she was 30, Fllorelis took in a 14-year-old boy named Anderson do Carmo from the streets. 7 years later, when Anderson turned 21, she married him. Together they launched the Comunidade Evangelica Ministerio Fllorelis. Anderson handled the operations and finances. Fllorelis remained the star, the voice, the face of it all. Over time, tension grew between them. Anderson kept strict control over all funds. Fllorelis wanted more say in financial matters. They argued about money and influence. On June 16, 2019, Anderson was shot many times outside their home. At first, Fllorelis said armed strangers on motorcycles were responsible. Within hours, 2 of her sons were in custody. One son admitted buying the weapon. The other said he was the one who pulled the trigger. Investigators then uncovered earlier attempts to poison Anderson with cyanide, at least 6 times. Court records showed that some adopted children felt she treated them unfairly. Investigators believe her goal was to take full control of the ministry's funds. She was formally accused in August 2020. At first, she could not be detained because of her political position. In mid-2021, her immunity was removed and she was arrested. Prosecutors said she planned the scheme so she could manage all the money. In November 2022, her trial took place in Niterói. The court heard evidence of the poisoning attempts, saw text messages, and listened to testimonies from 9 family members. One daughter said she believed her mother was behind it. Another said only Fllorelis could have done such a thing. Fllorelis denied any involvement. She claimed Anderson had mistreated her. She called the proceedings political retaliation. On November 13, 2022, the court found her guilty of ending Anderson's life, of poisoning plots, of falsifying documents, and of leading a criminal group. She received a sentence of 50 years and 28 days in a closed prison. The judge said the acts were driven by hate and a cold disregard for human life. In April 2024, an appellate court upheld her conviction. It also ordered that 2 adopted children and a granddaughter face new trials. Gu Kailai was born in 1958 in Linyi, Shaanxi Province. Her family had strong ties to China's ruling party. Her father, Gu Jingsheng, served as a senior officer in the People's Liberation Army. Gu earned both an LLB and an MA from Peking University. She became a skilled lawyer fluent in English. Her firm, Kailai Law, in Dalian, later renamed Beijing Angdao, built a name for taking on big international cases. She was one of the first Chinese lawyers to win a civil suit in the United States. She married Bo Xilai, a rising politician who joined China's Politburo and led Chongqing. That union gave her access to powerful networks. Her law firm won many clients because of her husband's post. Foreign businesses in Chongqing often felt they had no choice but to hire her firm. Between that advantage, family money held overseas, and rumors about additional assets, she became one of China's richest women. On November 14, 2011, a British businessman named Neil Haywood came to Chongqing. He had a friendly relationship with the Bogu family. Court papers say Gu invited him to the Lucky Holiday Hotel. She urged him to drink heavily. After he became ill and asked for water, helpers served him a drink. It was later found to contain cyanide. That drink had been mixed in advance by Gu and handed over by a family aide. Prosecutors argued that Haywood had grown greedy. They said he threatened to expose the family's financial dealings. He even warned he might harm her son, Bo Guagua. Gu's lawyers said she was suffering at the time. She had chronic sleeplessness, anxiety, depression, and deep fears. But court records concluded she still knew right from wrong. They said her mind was weak, but she understood her actions. The court did note her mental struggles, yet it held her fully responsible for the outcome. Judges accepted that she felt under threat and feared for her child. They found signs she was aware her plan could cost someone their life. This left a question. Was the act a desperate reaction or a carefully planned move? In February 2012, Chongqing's police chief, Wang Lijun, fled to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. He carried documents linking Gu to Haywood's passing. That triggered a full investigation. On April 10, 2012, Gu was taken into custody. On July 26th, she was formally accused of ending Haywood's life. Her trial opened on August 9, 2012, and wrapped up in less than a day. She did not argue against the charges. She stood and said she was sorry. She promised to accept whatever penalty came her way. On August the 20th, 2012, the Hefei Intermediate People's Court delivered its decision. Gu was found responsible. She received capital punishment held for 2 years before any change. In practice, that often converts to life in prison with a chance of parole later. The aide who delivered the drink got a 9-year term. 4 Chongqing officers received between 5 and 11 years for covering up key evidence. In court, Gu said, "The ruling is fair. It fully shows that our court respects the law, the facts, and above all, life." In December 2015, authorities changed her sentence to life behind bars. They cited her remorse, her cooperation, and her good behavior since arrest. She became eligible for a medical review after 9 years, in 2019, though there's no public record of an early release. As of mid-2025, she remains in prison under those lifelong terms.